Hello and welcome everybody to the first stream, or at least the first stream of the Christian Content Channel. It is currently 10 o'clock, but it doesn't matter because this is YouTube. You can just watch it later. Yeah, this will help. So, the reason I'm so late actually has to, ironically enough, do with my steak. One of the pieces, it was a little stringy. So, we went shopping. I saw a steak because I was craving steak, and I went by the meat aisle. Saw that there was a supposed Wagyu steak. So I was like, I never actually tried that brand of steak. I never tried that particular cut of meat with better marbling than a normal cut. So I was like, you know what? Let's try it. I'm still getting like chunks of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like really chewy bits. They're not going through. But yeah. I gotta say it's really good, and I ended up accidentally cooking this to about medium rare, with a hint of medium well on some ends. It was too much fun, but I also did something different. I put it in butter. All right. So I'm gonna skip that entire conversation. There's really no point to it. I think someone came in. Oh, I see what it's doing. All right. So I don't really have a lot of topics to talk about. I just wanted to start getting on this, and even if I start rambling, let me eat the steak for a little real quick. Don't want that to get cold. What I will mention is that I basically wrapped the steak in a shell of butter. That took a good amount of time to get out. It's got a really good garlicky taste because I put in compound butter. I made a compound butter with garlic and with thyme. It tastes really good. So, enough about the steak. More about God, more about the Bible. I'm going to edit the stream real quick. I wish this had a paid promotion. I don't really mean to be picking stuff. It's like, I think I got one of the tendons or something. Or something just really weirdly chewing. It's like the fat content. A little chewier than a normal steak, for some stupid reason. Oh, yeah, let me show you an example. Normal, if the coloring is there, let me pull up OBS for a second. And then you see the difference in red. Pink, red, pink, red. Whew. I don't know how. It just did it. I just don't understand how it did it. Seared it on both sides for like 4 minutes. Coated it in butter so that the flavor got sealed in. Put it on the pan for it to go into the oven, so that way it wasn't covered in grease the entire time. And then I put the thermometer in. Didn't read properly the first time. I said enough about the steak, and I'm still talking about the steak. Ah, well. I'm seriously running into every, like, overly chewy spot, and it's annoying. Anyway. Ah, it's still on. Okay, now. Alright. So with that being said, this is for the world to see anyway. I don't really care. Man's got to eat. And I had a very late dinner. But, yeah.
And steak in it.
It's steak. You can never eat that at a bad time. Especially, again, it was supposedly Wagyu. Like, good lord. So far, aside from the pieces that are attached to it, the meat is like pristine. I thought that I got a melt in your mouth type of steak the last time I made it with like a prime cut. Mm-mm. No. This. This did it. We have another example. Oh, this one's actually pink, roughly about pink on the same sides. Oh, yeah. That's another thing. Did someone actually just oh my lord. Someone commented on an old post from 6 months ago, supposedly.
Really?
Really?
Wait, where?
Reddit. Mm-mm. Last time I do that, I swear. Hmm. I got just the topic to start with. Roughly enough has to start with Chosen. Dear Lord, does it have to start with Chosen? Yes. Alright, so let's go back to like the old days of Hollywood for like 2 seconds. Definitely needed that. Go back to the old days of Hollywood when comedy became a thing. And I'm sure that comedy was always a thing anyway, way before that. But in the case of digital media, that was the thing. And obviously, humor is tied to some very subjective types of comedy, where some stuff might be funnier than others. Just depends on your personal view, just depends on you. And when it came to the comedy in the digital area, there was there were instances where people had decided to dream big, go big, and decided, you know, it's a good idea. Comedy with a hint of offensive material. And that's kind of one of the things that remains subjective. Some people believe, and I know this for a fact because my parents are like this, some people believe that comedy shouldn't be so hyper offensive, shouldn't be so. What's the word I'm looking for here? Shouldn't be so crass, shouldn't be so much like that. So take into account that they've made jokes about literally everything and anything that you can imagine. And the reason that I bring this up is because The Chosen, again, it has something to do with it, is kind of breaking some different norms when it comes to its filmmaking potential. More specifically, that the filmmakers are opting to take a certain approach to it and do some certain things that are not necessarily biblically accurate per se. And I'll go more into that as I talk about it. But it's kind of funny. It's kind of funny that Jesus can make a few jokes here and there. And then I was actually bearing witness to some of these comments when I was looking at some of their videos. But it turns out that some people are extremely offended that Jesus would make a joke, or Jesus would make a joke about his deity, or would just make a joke in general, like Jesus Christ, literally, people. Like, use your brain for 2 seconds if your denomination lets you. I'll take that one back when the day comes that someone's offended by that joke, but being sincere for 2 seconds, like, talking about Christianity and humor, would Jesus have made jokes? Would he have been humorous? Would he have been outgoing? Would he have been doing all these things and all that? Well, first off, he was a man of his day. Humor was probably not in short supply, but that wasn't his area of expertise. He was a carpenter. He was there for a specific purpose. He literally was born in the time he was for the right time to do the right thing for the entire earth. And so to say that Jesus, he was very purpose driven, but to say we gotta acknowledge who Jesus is at the core of it all. And Jesus, no matter what way we want to admit it or not, was both man and both God. He had to be man in order for his sacrifice to mean anything. He had to be able to die, and the only way you could do that is in immortal form, man. And with the Spirit of God, he had to be able to fulfill the law, and that's where the Spirit of God came in. He was able to fulfill it because he was able to keep himself. He was able to abstain from all sorts of evil, and as a result, he was able to fulfill the law. I actually read through some of these things when it came to my chronological readings of the Bible, and some of the things that I duly noted was, like, with the amount of the law that needed, like, in order first off to fulfill the law, you need to obey the law. And God, Jesus, was subject to the law that was set for man from Moses on Mount Sinai, initially from God. And in order for there to be any fulfillment, there needs to be obedience. He had to obey it. And here's the thing. A lot of the law had to go around different sacrifices for sins that were both known and unknown. In order for Jesus to fulfill the law perfectly, my figure, and I'm not saying that this is accurate in biblical structure, I'm just saying it's my best guess until I reach that point, and read more about it and find out more about it, would be that Jesus literally had to live so perfectly that he didn't need to do sacrifices for sins he did not commit. So thus, he would never have to give these animals, he would never have to shed these animals' blood, he never have to actually sacrifice animals in his place, both for known and unknown sins that he's committed. And as a result, he was fulfilling the law because he wasn't committing sin. And with that being said, we are given this picture of a perfect individual. But there's more to it. He had to be man. And you read through the Gospels that there were times where he was suffering in his flesh. Now, here's the thing. He may have been perfect, and I do utterly believe in his deity, but in order to be able to fulfill the law and have to take on flesh, that it means that his flesh has to be susceptible. In order for it to die, it needs to be mortal. It needs to be able to die. It needs to be able to lose its life. And as a result, Jesus may have been spiritually perfect, and we can agree on every bit of the spiritual perfection, but his physical perfection was only as far as the human side would let it. In other words, I do believe that his body, would still be susceptible to making mistakes and errors. When he was a carpenter, I'm sure there's plenty of times he's gotten cuts, scrapes, injuries of some sort, of some minor magnitude, and whether or not he would actually just heal himself or through divine divine, what's the word I'm looking for? Influence. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, that's not the important detail. The important detail is that his deity was, his spiritual godliness was the important thing. So let's take that into account. Again, the fact that he's a man, his flesh, the flesh of man that made up the Son of Man. I didn't even mean to make that parallel. It was, in order for his spirit to be grieved, that means that he has to still experience emotions. First off, God is a God of abundance. And no, I'm not talking about the prosperity gospels. I don't care about any of that. That's highly unscriptural in many different locations. But not talking about prosperity gospel, he is a God of abundance. But the fruits of the Spirit are something that a lot of people, I don't hear mention, but I'm pretty sure it's talked about, just not on frontline kind of talking. But the thing is, like, the fruits of the Spirit are joy, peace, long-suffering, etc., etc. God had to subject himself into man's flesh in order to fulfill the law. So wouldn't it only make sense that if we were capable of these emotions, that he would be as well? And remember, he's God. His spirit probably was multiple times more, I would say emotional, that's not the right word, but like, when the way that we experience emotion would be multiple, like, magnitudes above anything that we could experience, and that would be a fraction of whatever God would experience. When God is angry, he's probably angrier than any individual on this earth could ever possibly think about reaching. And that's only in the conscious thought, too, of how far and limit you could go. It's like anger at such a ferocity on the level of infinite. That's pretty big. So it would be fair to say that if God could experience, the emotions that he gave us, why would Jesus not be able to experience emotion himself? If one of the fruits of the Spirit is joy, what better way than to express joy through laughter, sharing a joke, making jokes? Humor is one way to experience joy. And he didn't have to be crass about anything. He was God. He probably made some jokes and parallels and all that. But obviously, being spiritually perfect as he was, would probably not compromise his entire fiber of being. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. And does Jesus make jokes? I'm sure he had to. I mean, again, if his body was able to stress, if his body was able to suffer, it's safe to assume that he was also able to experience humorous pleasures. Yes, he had the mentality of God, and sure, there might have been some silly things from his perspective that wouldn't be silly to us because we're on level ground, but to him it's like, oh, that's so adorable. It's like me watching my toddler, who's right now asleep, just stumble in the living room randomly. Like, sure, I might be like, oh, are you okay? But then I might chuckle and be like, oh, that was so adorable. That's probably what Jesus was thinking the entire time, too. I don't know. The point being is, humor is part of it. So, getting back into The Chosen now, they're depicting Jesus making jokes. And honestly, it wasn't even just the joke about his deity, it's just that Jesus making jokes in general. Okay, I don't know what world you live in where you think Jesus can't make jokes, but he is the creator of all things alongside God the Father. And to be quite frank, God created us with this imagination. He created us with this ability to have fun, do these things, experience wonderful things in this world, and experience wonderful emotions that were given from him. For Jesus not to make jokes would actually be more ungodly, because that would imply that he doesn't even experience the fruits that we experience, and these were God-given emotions. We experienced happiness and fulfillment in the garden, and there was joy, there was peace, there was patience. When God asked us something in the garden with Adam and Eve, They said, "Yes, Lord." And that was that. There was obedience. There was a sense of happiness. So to say that God can't make jokes or Jesus can't make jokes, especially Jesus, God the Father, as we've seen in the Bible, is more business oriented, if you'll call it that, and that's being very loose with the terminology. So don't even take that one personally. But he's more strict and focused on the actual end goal because it's an important thing that you can't joke about. You just truly can't. Jesus had 33 years on this earth under human flesh. And that's, again, just kind of the 33 years just at base level. I'm sure humor had to be part of it. He had to experience. My friend actually made a pretty good comparison. Jesus is like an artist who created a masterpiece painting. And then one random day he decides, you know what? I love this piece and I will always love it. There's always a place for it in my heart. But now I want to experience that peak joy of witnessing it for the first time again when I created it. So he knocks himself out, gives himself amnesia, wakes up, sees the masterpiece he created, is like, oh. That's basically the whole the whole experience of Jesus. He took on human flesh and was able to experience humankind from a perspective that he never really had. And that's huge considering. Now, moving on back to The Chosen, because this is like the fourth time that I've moved away from it unintentionally. He makes the joke about his deity when it came to the celebration, the wedding feast, his first miracle. They're having a celebration, they're dancing, having a good time. Oh, can you help my brother's two left feet? And you see Andrew dancing like an idiot. And Jesus is like, oh, there's even some things that I cannot do. The obvious joke there is that he can. And he probably would have had Andrew actually asked him, given him some coordination. But there was a grander purpose, too, and dancing wasn't part of it. You can be foolish in the nature of having fun. Especially when it's pure bliss and it's not in the intent of evil or in the intent of being... what's the word I'm looking for? Undecent? There's a decency in the foolishness that we can experience that God would probably be... Like, talk about King David in the what was it, book of 1st or 2nd Samuel or 1st or 2nd Kings? I don't remember where they mention it, but
Samuel.
I'm thinking Samuel. Probably 2nd Samuel, knowing how the structure works. But maybe the end of 1st, either way. They talk about David not rebuilding the temple, just building it the first time, right? Am I mixing things up?
So sorry, say it again.
King David, he built the temple initially? Or
No,
rebuilt it?
He wanted to build it. He made the plans, I believe, but Solomon was the one who built it because David had blood on his hands.
Ah,
Solomon was a king.
I forgot about that.
Solomon was king in a time of peace.
Yeah. Except for the Philistines.
And I believe that was the first temple.
Okay, so that's what I was figuring. Yeah, so either way, I do remember this bit about it. When the temple, or when they were establishing the plans for the temple, there was times where he was celebrating and dancing, if I recall correctly, as they described, like an idiot. That he was just dancing like a madman or a fool. That even his wife...
David danced so hard his clothes fell off.
Royal clothes, to be exact. But he danced until his royal garments fell off. He was just so filled with joy about building a temple. Like, obviously, if anyone heard my wife and what she said, he didn't get to do it. He didn't get to actually build it because there was blood on his hands. But Solomon was clean. He was clean of any blood on his hands and was thus able to complete the temple.
He was king during a time of peace.
Yeah, he was king during a time of peace. So, with that being said, we now come back to David. Imagine the joy that he felt, and to be called a fool for simply just dancing in joy in the presence of God. By his wife, by the way. His wife was the one who criticized him for dancing like a fool. And to think about that for a second, David was a man after God's own heart. For that to be listed as like one of the good things, honestly, we should probably be learning from that example, if anything. Like, I'm finding that whenever I'm deep in it and deep in it emotionally, and whether it's the Word of God or a worship song or anything really relating to Christendom, if you'll call it that, it's it's big. You want to move. You want to do something. You don't want to just sit still. You can't sit still. You're in a zone, if you call it, of joy. You're in a zone of happiness. You're in a zone. I want to say bliss, but I don't even know if that's the proper word. But I keep burping. I ask you guys excuse me on that one. Also, it feels like I'm losing my voice, even though I haven't been talking much. So that's kind of weird. But getting back, so Jesus making a joke is not really out of the stretch of imagination. It really is not. And I don't understand why people had actually flipped their lid at the first mention of Jesus making a joke. It's actually quite sad. Like, do you really just imagine your Lord and Savior not experiencing the emotions that he gave you? Much less in the fact that Jesus was God made flesh. God the Son made flesh was experiencing emotions that was originally set with mankind in the first place. And he's experiencing it because he is the Spirit of God. Imagine how overjoyed he was from time to time to hear when someone's faith broke through, whenever he would test him. And how overjoyed he was when people, actually did the right thing, as it were, and responded the way they did. The woman with a possessed daughter, the Syrophoenician woman. Her faith was greater than even people of the Israelic area. That felt really weird to describe. I don't know why. Moving on. No, I think I might have used the wrong word. It just felt really weird. So, to the Israelites, to the people who were following in the faith, the Levites, the priests, and all that, she came in the presence of a rabbi, Jesus, and expressed her faith. Someone who was not only deemed less than dirt for simply just being who she was, but also less than dirt because she wasn't part of the original nation. She was part of a pagan nation. And Jesus gave the typical answer of a Jewish priest at the time, and basically said, be gone from me. Like, what do you have? Like, why should I give you the food that I give the children? Which is an answer that every rabbi would have given. And there's a reason that he gave that answer. Why should I give the children's food to the dogs? A.E. insulting her. But there was a test to it, because of how you respond is the important thing. And in that instance, she expressed her faith and saying, even we, as dogs, deserve the scraps. Yes, Lord, but even we deserve the scraps. Imagine how overjoyed, both in flesh and spirit, Jesus must have been to hear that woman give the answer that she did. First off, she was in an emotional turmoil. Her daughter had a possessed spirit, and you can't get more unclean than an unclean spirit. And be honest, like, if you were testing someone to see, like if you were testing a loved one to see if they really loved you and they gave you an answer beyond your expectation, you would be happy too. And that's the instance of Jesus. He was testing this woman's faith because it needed to be tested. She had an unclean spirit, and she sought for the answer when she heard that the Lord, the Messiah, was there. She sought him out and begged for him to do this in submission. And furthermore, he gave her the test by giving the typical answer. I shouldn't be giving a dog the food of the children. Because that's what the priests would have answered. And then when she gave the answer she did, how overjoyed he must have been to hear her say that. Because it would show that even in the least among them, there was still some great faith to be had. There was still some great faith to be expressed. The expression of faith makes him overjoyed. Then the Roman centurion was another example. The one with the servant that was sick. He sought out Jesus and said, I heard you could do miracles. I have a servant who's sick, and I would like you to make him well again. And Jesus was like, okay, I will come over and I will heal your servant. The funny thing is that that wasn't per se even a test. That was Jesus answering the offer, and the centurion went the step further in a test he didn't even know was a test. It wasn't even like an obvious test either, because Jesus was like, yeah, I'll do it. Sure, I'll just come on over. The centurion literally answers him and says, I'm a high-ranking official in the Roman legion. When I say something, my servants do it. Like, if I say something, they obey. I know that if you ask of God, it will happen. Just say the word and my servant will be healed, and I will trust you. If I were in Jesus' position, and that's a very huge stretch, like you can't imagine that, but if I were to imagine for 2 seconds, it's kind of like your heart skips a beat for a second, like, I love you even more now. Your servant's healed. Go on home and be with him. And so how overjoyed the centurion now must be to realize, like, oh, this man truly is who he says he is. It's huge. It's huge. The expression of faith, how happy Jesus must have been in those two areas of expression. And then even talking about that, how happy he is when there is one that comes back. Talking about Peter, I can't even imagine, like the Bible does mention it in a more of a serious tone, talking about Peter's betrayal of Jesus. And, you know, when they have their walk when he comes back, and he says to Peter, Peter, son of Jonah, do you love me? Or Simon, son of Jonah, whatever. Do you love me? And Peter answered him 3 times in a row to Jesus' response of, feed my sheep, take care of my sheep, lead my sheep, so on and so forth. He was restoring him 3 times because he is the God of restoration, and how happy he must have been to know that Peter did not give in. That was one of his sentences, and I read it for myself. Satan has sought you and asked for you that he may sift you as wheat, and I pray that your faith will not fail you. His faith did fail, but he stayed strong. Judas and Peter were 2 very big examples of this. That they both committed betrayal, maybe in their own unique way, but at the end of the day, they still betrayed someone that they considered their master, someone that they knew was God. We're told plainly that that he was God. They betrayed him in their own unique ways. Judas is a great example of what happens if your faith truly fails you. He took his own life in grief, thinking, "Oh, I can't come back from this." Peter, on the other hand, he might have hit that point if given long enough. We won't know for sure because he didn't. He lived up until the point that he died a martyr for Jesus and giving the lesson. But think about that. He was at the point similar to Judas, like, I can't come back from this. But instead of taking his life, he waited it out. And when Jesus confronted him and restored him those times, imagine first off how relieved Peter must have been in a mix of emotions of like, I betrayed him and he still forgave me. And Jesus here saying, I'm so glad that your faith did not fail you. For Jesus to not make jokes, for Jesus to not experience emotion of any caliber. There's times he's gotten angry with his disciples as well. Not talking about the chosen, just talking about the Bible. It's just, how can anyone really not think that he doesn't experience emotion in some way, shape, or form? It's just so mind-boggling that the God of creation, the God whose fruits of the Spirit are joy, as one of the first ones mentioned, doesn't experience joy in manhood. It just makes no sense to me. But talking about the chosen, there's another topic to talk about while I'm killing some time. And this one has more to do with... this one has to do more with their biblical accuracy. Because I know that The Chosen has been kind of like an iffy show. A lot of people have been saying like, "Oh, don't watch this show. It's completely biblically inaccurate, and and you shouldn't be watching it because it's misleading, and it's a whole bunch of different criticisms, honestly." So I'm taking a viewpoint on this as both a Christian as a potential filmmaker. And I say potential because I haven't yet made any major pieces, but, tomato, tomato. The point, the point stands that one of the biggest things we do need to realize here, nothing is going to be 100% accurate. If you look at any TV show, any series, any movie depicting Jesus Christ, it's the same thing that I did on a previous video talking about Moses, the Exodus story problem. Refer to the video somewhere in my history. I think it was like the second to last video from this point on, or if not the last video before my short. But one of the big problems with that story is it's the depiction. They depict the Exodus story, and the same thing with the story of Jesus, both can be used in the same example. But there's always going to be an inaccuracy, whether or not you intend there to be, but there's an entertainment value in there that they do for creative freedom. And in this instance, The Chosen's taking that to a level of trying to stay biblically accurate as much as possible, while providing this. Because here's the thing. Take, for example, any point in the Bible where you see Jesus traveling from one city to another, or one region to another. There's always these instances of the time between. You think, oh, he traveled from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's not just an instant, hey, we're here. No, he obviously had to travel by some means. They walked, they took a donkey, they took a cart, they traveled in a group. I don't know how they did it. But when it comes to the Chosen and how they're depicting the time in between with the journey and everything and how they're putting it in order, I think that they should be given the leeway of creative freedom because, first off, they're not just dilly-dallying, throwing random things in and hoping that it comes together in a coherent story. No. They're talking about it. It's obviously coherent enough. But trying to fill in gaps, they're trying to, condense things. Because ultimately, at the end of it, there is information that we don't know from the Bible itself. We know, say, John 3:16, the way that they depicted that scene. There was some dialogue between Nicodemus and Jesus that probably would have been a greeting that John didn't decide to take until he started hearing some very important conversation pieces happening. But do you really think that Nicodemus just addressed him immediately and started asking him questions? Or do you think that they had a typical greeting of I need to meet this man. Is it possible that I could take you for your time? You don't know how the interaction starts or ends. We just know the important pieces. That's one of the big things about all writing, is that it's not going to depict everything. There's things that happen in real life that don't get taken down. Even if I was to write my life story, I'm sure that there would be plenty of gaps as well. But when it comes to The Chosen, same difference. There's things that happen in between. There's things that happen that are within the stretch of imagination, of reason and logic, that you can put in there, and especially when it comes to filmmaking, with the purpose of entertainment in mind, that's highly important. I don't blame them for making half the creative decisions that they do. And I'm actually quite pleased with it as a filmmaker. And as a Christian, here's the thing. The show needs to still continuously put this from season to season. I don't know why they didn't do it for season 2. But for season to season, they need to put the disclaimer that the story is not 100% biblically accurate. It's not. And they admitted it in the first episode of the first season, but they didn't do it in the second. But they need to put that disclaimer because people are still going to have issues. But the reason that they need this disclaimer is because in that disclaimer they say we are putting creative direction as historically as accurately as possible with the time of Jesus consistent with it. And then even furthermore, they say if you want the real story, go read the Gospels. So he points to the actual source material in question, and that's where he gets it. And with that being said, that's already enough of a disclaimer right there, but people have ignored it and been like, oh, it's unbiblical and nobody should be watching. They acknowledged it, that it's not 100% biblical. It's for an entertainment purpose. For the love of God, literally, watch it for what it is and base it on its merits. Like, when it comes to the biblical inaccuracies, for the sake of entertainment, you could ignore it. Now, should you ignore it? Probably not. You shouldn't ignore it. But at the same time, acknowledge that it's not going to be 100% because they can't be 100%. If they were perfect, then maybe it could be 100%. But no man is perfect. They're depicting what they can. They're depicting what they're able to depict. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that I got from that disclaimer, is that they acknowledge that they can't cover everything, but they're doing their best to remain as faithfully accurate to the Gospels as possible. And that's all that you can do, as any filmmaker. So I don't blame him at all, and quite honestly, I think that people just need to chill. I enjoy it. And honestly, it's here's another thing. It doesn't matter whether or not it's 100% accurate. They're taking what they can from the Bible and using that as their primary base and including it in the show. But there are still times in between where the conversations between the characters, because they actually are believable actors, they're actually, like, I believe that's how Matthew, Peter, John, and all the rest of the disciples are, save for Judas. We didn't see him for much more than one episode. But I wouldn't doubt that that's actually how the disciples probably interacted with each other. It's endearing. It's a connection. It's an empathetical connection that we share as humans. And I wouldn't doubt that that's how the disciples probably were in real life. I'd actually be happy with that. But they do state some really good brain teasers, like, that gets you thinking, and that's the thing. Critical thinking is part of it. You need to always be critically thinking as a Christian. Sure, there's times of rest, but you need to always be thinking critically. Like, Jesus always answered questions with more questions because you couldn't just stop at an answer. There was a deeper underlying answer that weighted it, and it wouldn't have been found out if you don't probe. So when the guy came over to him, the rich man of the law came to him and said, "What are the greatest commandments? What are the greatest of the commandments? You're a teacher of the law. You tell me." Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. There you go. You know the law. Actually, I'm pretty sure that now that I think about it, I might be mixing my stories here, and I hope not. But I think it's more akin to. I think it was that he came up to him and said, like, shoot, I don't remember what he. It was one of three things, and I can't remember what they were. But he came up to him, and then that probed the question of who's my neighbor, and that's what led to the parable of the neighbor. Jesus asked the critical question, but you wouldn't have gotten the parable had he not asked him, what are the two greatest commandments? Like, what I think, if I recall correctly, is how can I shoot, what was I'm trying to word the question is what I'm trying to do. What must one do to inherit the kingdom of heaven? What are the two greatest commandments? Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. I'm pretty sure that was it. I'm really starting to doubt myself right now because I'm also tired. But jokes aside. But critically thinking is an important part of it, and the show does a very good job of taking the characters within biblical accuracy as much as possible and getting you to critically think about some of the things that are transpiring on screen that you probably wouldn't have gotten if you just read them straightforward. It's mind-boggling from time to time, and like, how does anybody actually hate this show? I'm going to make one last discussionary piece. Just one. What's a good one to talk? Ooh. I was going to do that interview thing, but I'll save that for when I'm streaming earlier. So here's a good one. So earlier I made the short that I aforementioned. I made a short, and the title of the short was "You Cannot Curse What God Has Blessed." So I found a really neat story involving. I believe he was a. Let me go back to that for a second, because I know where it is and I could quickly get to it. But in the book of Numbers, there was the story of Balaam. And the reason that he's significant is because he was. Let me see, where were you? Balaam and sacrifice. The children of Israel set forward. Balak and God came to Balaam. Okay. And the elders of Moab and departed. Balaam spoke the words of Balak. Yeah. And God said to Balaam, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." I'm pretty sure he was a prophet. I'm not 100% certain about who he was. But the story starts with him getting contacted by the king Balak. And Balak was the king, where was it, Zippor? The king of the Moabites, yeah, and the son of Zippor, excuse me. Balak, the son of Zippor, and king of the Moabites. So the funny thing is that he came to Balaam and said, "The children of Israel who just came out of Egypt, they're coming and approaching upon my land. They're gonna, they're gonna come and take my land. They're gonna come and oppress me. I need you to curse them." So he sent, what did he say? The princes, or did he send just? I think it was a diviner, quite honestly, now that I look at one of them, because they were asking him to do divination. So he might have actually not been a prophet, but he might have acknowledged God enough. I don't know. But even in the instance of evil, it was still used for a case of good, because he managed to reach God, and God said, "Do not curse them. I blessed them." And so this is like one of 3 times, and supposedly in the mention of Revelation, and I saw this when Googling it, initially to find where he was again, because I'd forgotten. Supposedly he told Balak and said, "Hey, so they're, if you want to get to them, you have to make God abandon them, and you need to get them to sin," or something weird like that. I'm not 100% certain, and I don't want to make assumptions here. But something in Revelation that he gave Balak information of how to trick the people to commit sin so that God would leave them, and he would be able to overtake them, but obviously that didn't happen. At the end of it all things, Israel still prevailed, and the king of the Moabites was still defeated, ultimately. But Balaam, 3 times in a row, was asked by Balak, "Go to God and tell him to curse these people so that I can win." And every single time he went to God, God answered in turn, "No, I will not curse them, because I have blessed them." And so some of the answers that he got, with you, Balaam rose up and told them all that he refuses, and he came to Balaam and said, "Promote you very greatly." Basically Balak was trying to bribe him, and Balaam had to answer. He said to the servants, "If Balak would give me a house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more. Now therefore I pray you, tarry you also here this night, that I may know that the Lord will say to me more." And then when God came to Balaam at night, he's like, "If the men come to call you, raise up and go with them, but yet the word which I shall say to you, that shall you do." A.E., I'm not going to curse them. Later on, that leads to the story of him beating his donkey, and and then he does the same thing. And the Lord put the word in Balaam's mouth and said, "Return to Balak, and thus you shall speak. and returned to him, and lo, he stood by his burnt sacrifice, and he and all the princes of Moab, and he took up his parable, began his discourse, and said, Balak the king of Moab has brought me from Aram out of the mountains of the east, saying, Come, curse me, Jacob, and come defy Israel. How shall I curse whom God has not cursed? And how shall I defy whom the Lord has not defied? For from the top of the rocks I see him, and from the hills I behold him. Lo, the people shall dwell alone, and shall not be reckoned among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob and the number of the fourth part of Israel? Let me die the death of the righteous, and let my last end be like his. And Balak said to Balaam, What have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have blessed them altogether. Funny enough, he was blessing Israel at this instance. And he answered and said, Must I not take heed to speak that which the Lord hath put in my mouth? Then again, Balak asks him to do the same thing in a different ritual. And then he came, and behold, his burnt offering, blah, 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 same instance, was as the Lord spoken. And he took up his parable and said, Raise up Balak, and hear, and hearken to me, son of Zippor. God is not a man, that he should lie, neither the son of man, that he should repent. Has he said, and shall he not do it? Or has he spoken, and shall he not make it good? Behold, I have received commandment to bless, and he has blessed, and I cannot reverse it. He has not beheld iniquity in Jacob, neither has he seen perverseness in Israel. The Lord his God is with him, and the shout of a king is among them. God brought them out of Egypt. He has, as it were, the strength of a unicorn or a wild bull in this instance. Surely there is no enchantment against Jacob, neither is there any divination against Israel. According to this time, it shall be said of Jacob and of Israel that God has done. Behold, the people shall rise up as a great lion and lift himself as a young lion, and he shall not lie down until he may eat of the prey and drink of the blood of the slain. Kind of a weird verse to go off on. And Balak again just basically get answers, and he says, neither curse them at all nor bless them at all. Like, if you're not going to curse them, don't bless them. And Balaam had to answer and said to him, Told not I you, saying, All that the Lord speaks, I must do. God told Balaam to bless them, and he had to bless them. Balak was basically trying his hardest to wiggle around and weasel his way around, kind of similar to how Satan did with Job. He was trying to weasel his way through out of fear of what was to come. He knew that Israel was a great nation and a great threat because God was with them in defeating their enemies. So for him to be so desperate as to tell a prophet of great magnitude, if you will, like, curse my enemies 3 times in a row, even though God said, no, I won't do it. Here's what you're going to tell him. I will not undo the blessings of which I have blessed. There is a promise upon Jacob. There is a promise upon Israel. You will not curse what I have blessed, but rather you should bless what I have blessed. And Balaam did that. And by the way, this was all of between Numbers 22 and 23. And actually in 24, I think he does it a 4th time. Except in this instance, I think in this instance he didn't even do it, if I recall correctly. And if he did do it a 4th time, then it's still the same result. I'm trying to speed read through it so that I don't take too much time. But this is what they were talking about in Revelation, number 25. Israelites commit adultery with Moab. And I think that was a way for them to overcome Israel for a temporary amount of time. Yeah, I think that was it. So, end all be all argument, it's kind of like a cool feeling. Like, if God has blessed you, no one can curse you. All they can, like, if God has ordained you as his own, if you were chosen of God, then there is nothing that can curse you. There's nothing that can come against you because God's blessing is greater than anything in this world can take from you or even try to take from you. And this was huge, by the way, that you can make these different connections too in these different Bible stories. And one of the biggest ones to me is talking about Jesus' lesson. Thought I heard my baby. Bless those that curse you, and pray for those that persecute you. Taking the moral high ground, if you will. Because God has asked you to do that, because if you love him, you will obey his commands. That was one of the biggest things. Seeing how blessings and curses work. That God can literally do both. But when he has blessed you, the only one who can undo it is him. And he's one who keeps his word, so he won't be the one to break his promise. But if there is a promise made, then he will fulfill it. And that just shows his faithfulness. And when we're now given the parable, or not the parables, but the words of Jesus, bless those that curse you and pray for those that persecute you, that's a very big thing. Especially understanding how blessings work. Blessings are not wishes, by the way. I should probably note that. Blessings are not wishes that you could just simply bless something and it immediately, like, has the effect of a genie that it multiplies. In fact, actually, going back to The Chosen for a second, me and my wife mentioned something kind of funny. Jesus blessed the bread and the fish and then duplicated everything in the basket by just simply dividing it. In The Chosen, Matthew and Thomas are very numbers oriented, like very logical minded, and they depict Matthew with a little bit of an autism, I think. But it's kind of funny, he's very numbers oriented, so he always calculates odds, numbers, and all that. So now think about this. He had an existential crisis when Jesus helped gather the fish, and as far as I know, he hasn't witnessed too many more miracles other than the healing of a few individuals and all that. But it's kind of funny that he had his mind blown from just the fishes on the boat when they got Peter and the Sons of Thunder and Andrew. I had to think of his name for a second. He had his mind blown like that's logically impossible. Imagine how much his brain is going to swell the moment that Jesus multiplies the fish and the bread. That is going to be a sight to uphold. And funny enough, I think it's on the 18th or on the 16th, somewhere along that line. Pretty sure it's the 18th. But on the 18th, The Chosen's going to arrive. And oh my God, they're going to put it in theaters. And we're going to finally see what Matthew's going to do with this new information that God is just essentially did duplication hacks in real life. And that's like the coolest thing ever that you can imagine, like, put on film. They're just upping the ante each time. But being sincere for a second, blessings can go a long way. Blessings can truly go a long way. And it's just amazing to think the power of a blessing. In fact, even thinking about this, Jacob wrestled God. And when he had, I think it stated that he won. I don't even know. It doesn't really matter if he won or lost. The end point is that he had, just before he let the man, God, go, he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks. Not until you bless me." That's interesting. That's interesting. What is your name? Jacob. It is no longer Jacob. It is now Israel. You know what's funny? That actually mirrors Jesus too much. And it's kind of funny because he renamed Simon to Peter. And that was also a meme too. I really wish I could show it, but I actually can't. What is your name? Simon. Hello, Peter. Spider-Man fans will probably get that one. Alright, jokes aside though. that was pretty much my only thoughts for the day. I'm glad I had this time, and even if I didn't get any viewers, I will probably get it during the day because it's gonna save. So I'm gonna make this a weekly habit, preferably earlier in the evening, so I could retain some attention. But with that being said, for anyone who watches this in the future, thank you so much for listening to me ramble, and I hope to see some... In fact, you know what? One last thing. If you watch the video all the way through to now, which has been an hour, do me a favor. Both for me and yourself. Leave a comment down below of something you want me to talk about. I'm willing to literally talk about anything and everything relating to Christianity, Jesus, anything in general. I don't care what it is, because at the end of the day, I'll just tell you if I do or don't know it. But I'm going to pick some of the logical arguments that I know that I can make. But leave comments down below. Leave questions. I'm willing to answer them. I'm willing to make them talking topics. I'm willing to go off on a rant on them. So if you watch the video all the way through, do me that favor. Leave that comment. Leave that subject. I will make videos on it. Stream on it. Whatever you want to talk about. I'm thinking I'm going to create YouTube shorts during the week. We'll figure that out as time goes on. But I'm making content again. And I'm going to figure out a loose schedule to follow until I can, tighten the grip after the holidays. Oh, speaking of the holidays, Thanksgiving is coming up and my daughter's birthday is falling alongside with that. It's going to be a major cluster week on that time. So I'm probably going to be taking a break for a good half of a week to a week long, depending on that. So if you don't see any uploads, that's really the reason why. But other than that, I'm going to do gaming streaming tomorrow as long as my multi-streaming works, so I hope to see you on the gaming channel if you haven't followed me there yet either. But if gaming's not your thing, that's fine. I appreciate the company here. And with that said, I'm going to go. You guys have a great night. Thank you for, even if I wasn't entertained per se, I hope that I entertained you at the very least. God bless, have a good night, and I will see you the next time I do this.